thank you all for taking the time from your busy schedule to talk about health and wellness, and specifically in longevity. And I'm really excited that we get to talk about this because I really feel like, sometimes we forget that it's really about our overall health should be at the core of what we do every day, even in our professional and personal life. And so today we'll be talking about ikigai. If I don't know if you've heard of this, but we're going to talk about this concept, which I feel like has been a buzzword within the professional, career space. But we're also going to take a look at other aspects that you can implement into your day-to-day. And so let me share my screen because I did put together a few slides that could hopefully shed some light on it. So I am sharing it right now. Can everyone see it? Okay, great. So I know Katie was nice enough to introduce me, and nice to meet you all. My name is Saori. And so like Katie mentioned, Shalaka and I actually go back. I know Shalaka since I was 18, so she's seen me throughout the years. But, we both went to the University of Virginia in the US. And so I moved to London from New York last year to start Mogami. And Mogami is actually my mother's maiden name. And if you look at the characters, it translates to highest level. And so the mission of Mogami is to empower individuals to achieve their best selves. And this is one that's sustainable, holistic, mindful, and centered around longevity. And so what we do is we provide private coaching, as well as group wellness events and online education focused on these 5 main wellness concepts that we'll be talking through. And a little bit more about my background. Before I moved to London, I actually worked in a little bit of a different industry. I worked in the media and advertising analytics industry. And so I was a director there. And while I found it really fulfilling in many ways, I was always challenged. I learned a lot about technology. I couldn't help but shake this feeling that I was meant to do something else, especially because my free time was spent doing things about overall health and wellness. And I was also trying to implement these things in terms of, how my team could be more holistically healthy while I was, leading this team. And in terms of my background, I did go to a 2-year coaching certification school. So I did get my certified, wellness coaching program that was part of ITN, which is part of the International Coaching Federation program. And so this is where I studied, what it is to be a wellness coach. And I'm also a student of Japanese calligraphy. So I'm curious, maybe you could write in the chat function, or you could raise your hand if you ever tried Japanese calligraphy. No, I'm seeing it. That's okay. That's just great. But Japanese calligraphy is one of the 3 traditional arts of Japan. And it's said that through practicing these arts, it's helping us understand what it means to live a more meaningful and intentional life. And so, I'm so grateful to my mother who helped me start this practice when I was really young. And there's a part where you're given a calligraphy name. So my teacher gifted me the name Seisa.
Sayori, can you, we're talking about the calligraphy there. So Mogami, I think that's the right pronunciation. And you've got the Japanese characters beside it. Can you explain them to us? Can you demystify them for us?
Yes, absolutely. And that's such a great question because this character here was written by my mother, actually. And so, I say I wrote it for 20 years. My mom actually has practiced it for 35 years. So I'm much more of a junior. But Mogami, the first character here, means the highest or upmost. And then the second character, ue, which is also me, means that it means the highest. And so it really is a powerful notion that we are trying to be your highest level self. And so that's really what the calligraphy means here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I did see someone say they wish they tried it. And so, that's something that we actually teach to Megumi. It really is about, you could start with just a piece of pen and paper. And so hopefully we can talk about that too. Right, great. So that is a little bit about me. And so in terms of today's talk, I did put together a quick agenda. And again, I really want this to be conversational. So please, if you have any questions, put it in the chat feature. You can, you could ask me along the way. But we wanted to first talk about Japan and longevity. And then from there, I wanted to do a little bit of deep dive into the ikigai Venn diagram. Because, coming from market research, I was really curious why I kept seeing this Venn diagram that I've never seen in Japan. And so what I'm hoping to do is try to shed some light on where this came from. And then from there, I wanted to talk about the true definition of ikigai. So what is it and what does it mean? We're going to take a look at the word itself because there's a lot of hints within that. And then we'll wrap up with looking at the gaps that we might be victim to if we have used the Venn diagram, and then how it can tie in with our overall well-being with some actionable takeaways. All right. Awesome. So, like I mentioned, if you did not know, Japan is considered one of the top longevity nations in the world. It has more centenarians per capita than any country, and the average Japanese citizen lives for about 85 years. And you may be able to guess, this is my grandma at the back, and she definitely lived a really long, helpful life. Yes, we were dancing along and taking pictures in this picture. Yeah, no, she's definitely one of that has helped me along this way as well. But if we look at why, Japan is considered a longevity nation, I'm curious maybe what comes up for you. Is it food? Is it diet? Is it, there's a lot of potential reasons that may be coming up for you. But the way I like to explain it is using a puzzle of diet. Yes, that's a great point. So diet is very much an important factor. Spirituality. Oh, that's a great point too. Yes. Mm-hmm. And so I think the way that we can visualize this is using a puzzle here. And so this is the puzzle that I like to reference. Oh, Amelia, community. Yes. Oh, that's a great one. These are all great ones. And so the way we want to put this together is that there's 5 main aspects that we could focus on in terms of wellness that's inspired by the overall concepts of Japanese culture, as well as looking specifically at the wellness components. So let's take a deep dive into each of these. So the first one is presence and mindfulness. So like I mentioned, Japan has these arts, and practicing calligraphy, which has over 2,000 years of history. The principles of practicing calligraphy is in truth talking about being more mindful and creating moments of presence. A really quick example of this is that there is a state that you want to achieve when you practice calligraphy. This is called mushin. And mushin is the state called mind of no mind. And it is a state where you're free of all thoughts, all assumptions, and all prejudice. But the challenge of mushin is that if you're thinking of being in mushin, you're not in mushin, right? Because you're thinking. And so the way to actually create moments for presence is through action and through the practice of being present in the moment. And in calligraphy or the arts, it's said that we need to have creative moments to be able to exercise this. So this is a really important aspect because it's saying that it doesn't have to be calligraphy. It doesn't have to be other arts. It could be whatever creative outlet is important for you, but it's important to create these moments in your daily lifestyle to be able to have a holistic lifestyle for longevity. Yeah, so I'm curious, maybe you could write in the chat function, do you have a creative outlet right now in terms of, let's look at this month of July. What has been your creative outlet that you have been able to practice? So perhaps that's sketching, perhaps that's drawing, perhaps that's Jessamine crafting. I think It could be anything, but I would love for everyone to take a moment to check in and perhaps write it down for us. Cooking. Oh, you child, that's a really good one. Playing violin and learning new tunes. Yes. Gardening, Mark. Yes, that's a great one. Jay, learning a different language. I'm curious which language it is. Shalaka, reading. These are all great. Spanish. Okay. Oh, this is so awesome because I think we often try to, it sounds well-being can be very, stuck to diet or food, and it's actually more than that. It's really a holistic approach. So I love that everyone is writing this. Coloring books. Yes, that's beautiful. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so what I encourage everyone to do, if you don't have one now, that's completely okay. And I think that's also something that I really like to make sure everyone understands. This is really all about acceptance and awareness. And so now that we understand that creative moments can actually help us in terms of our well-being, I really encourage everyone to try to find something that helps in terms of their creative outlet. Right. So the next one is body and soul care. And I think someone mentioned spirituality as a component, and I thought that was a really insightful answer. So in terms of Japan, in terms of Japanese wellness, we think of a person having a body and a soul to take care of. And this is kokoro to karada, where kokoro is your heart and your soul, and your karada is your body. And it is thought that you have to take care of both in terms of understanding your overall well-being. And when we talk about taking care of our body, we think about it in these aspects. So this is nourishing food. So it's a whole foods-based diet. That was one of the answers. So absolutely, incorporating daily movement into your life, as well as ample rest. Next, in terms of taking care of your soul. So, I understand that not everyone is spiritual, and I think that's totally okay. But when we're talking about our soul, it's really more just about our longing for connection. And, we all are, social animals, and that actually helps us understand that we seek connection on 3 levels. So the first one is a connection to yourself. So do you feel as though you know who you are and you're creating time for yourself? The second is your community. Do you feel like you have a sense of belonging within your community where you are accepted and you could be yourself and are supported? And last but not least, environmental. And so this is really connecting with nature to help rejuvenate. There is this word in Japanese, which is iyashi. And iyashi is this word where you are taking time to do certain activities that rejuvenate you. And they're often found in nature, such as, taking a bath in an onsen or a hot springs. This is really meant to really help us connect with nature. All right, so next, authenticity. So I think this is a really interesting one because I think that this is a term that is thrown around a lot, but I sometimes struggle myself when I was trying to understand who I am authentically, because there weren't any properties in terms of where to start. And so there is this word called wabi-sabi in Japanese. And while this is often used in a design context, it's actually more than that. It's actually understanding how you could be yourself. And so this borrows on this idea that nature is the ultimate form of, nature and natural. And so that as part of this world, in Mother Earth, we follow the same principles. And so this is actually accepting that we are imperfect, we are impermanent, and we are incomplete. And by accepting these principles, it helps us to be ourselves. So perhaps, I think during COVID, a lot of people had this notion that, wow, these past 2 years have impacted them in one way or another. And perhaps the life that you lived previously doesn't connect with you anymore. You just don't feel that certain sense of, alignment. And some people actually really, it's hard for them to accept this notion. But what we want to do is actually, by accepting that this is part of who we are, we could actually try to evolve and in a direction of change. So this is really a helpful tool that's going to accept our changing and evolving journey. And then last but not least,
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
What are your recommendations for people who are kind of struggling with their authenticity? Are there any kind of mindfulness activities, or what can those people do?
That's a great question, and I think we need to simplify well-being. That's really what even I believe, we need to focus on. Sometimes we focus on these huge goals, saying I want to hit X in 6 months, or I need to hit this milestone. And that's not necessarily going to be helpful if we don't do daily actions of what you could implement into your life. So what I would recommend is taking an audit of your lifestyle right now. This week, let's take a look. It's Wednesday. How has Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday served you? And then we take it down into actionable items that align with these aspects of taking care of yourself. Awesome. Great. And I think that really ties into this idea of ikigai. And so I'm so curious if people have seen the ikigai Venn diagram, or have they used it? And it's completely acceptable if you have used the Venn diagram. I really want to be clear. I do think it's a great intention. But I'm curious, Mark, for example, have you seen the Venn diagram? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
No, I haven't. No.
Okay, got it. Laura, I haven't seen it. Okay, that's great, actually. Oh, I have. Okay, great. Okay, so I think we're at a split here in terms of who have seen it, have come across it. I've seen versions of it, haven't used it. Got it. Well, I think in terms of the Venn diagram, let's take a look briefly then, because I'm glad to hear that people perhaps haven't come across it, because a lot of times it's first with trying to debunk that this Venn diagram may not serve you. So ikigai is a Japanese concept that refers to reason for being. And the Venn diagram that I'm referencing is listed here on the left-hand side. And it's essentially saying that your purpose or your reason for being can be found by taking a look at these 4 factors. It is the intersection between what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you are good at. But I'm glad that the majority of people haven't used this Venn diagram, because I personally think that this is starting off on the wrong foot, and it actually isn't reflective of the authentic definition. And so where did this come from was my first question, because I saw this pop up in my personal life 3 times in the same week. One was a professional women's seminar. I had a coach come in and talk about this framework. The second was from my friend who was doing this career changing course, and she references the diagram. And another one was, it was in a book. It's the Ikigai book, and on the back, there's actually this Venn diagram. And so you could probably imagine my confusion when I saw this, because it's a term that everyone knows in Japan, but it's never referenced in this Venn diagram. So in terms of what happened, it looks like 3 main events occurred for this misunderstanding to occur. So the first one, this Venn diagram is actually a different purpose model. And it was created by a Spanish astrologer named Andrew Suzunaga in 2011, and completely irrespective of ikigai. And he called it his Propósito framework, and he developed this while he was pondering on the life's purpose in 2011. From there was a TED Talk that was done by Dan Butler. And Dan Butler, you may know him, he is famous for the Blue Zone study, And he is a National Geographic writer and explorer who studies the world's longest lived people. And in his TED Talk, he referenced how ikigai is a part of Japanese culture and is a really important factor to understanding longevity. Then the third aspect that happened is that there was a blogger, wayfinder, coffee shaman, mentor, and advisor named Marquin. And he wrote a blog post in 2014 called "What is Your Ikigai?" And he changed purpose to ikigai to share his interpretation of this concept. So very fascinating. But then the next question that you may be thinking is, does Marx model hold some truth? And the answer is yes and no, which I feel like is not the best answer, but it is true, where this can be someone's ikigai, but it does not have to be. And in Dan's TED Talk, if you listen to it, he mentions this, where he interviews people about what their ikigai is. And this lady on the right here, who's a centenarian, said that it is to hold her great-great-great-granddaughter. And I want to pause here because I think this really helps illuminate some of the gaps that we want to be mindful of if we do end up using this framework, because it helps us understand that, you know, you wouldn't be able to come to her answer if we use this framework. And so that is why it's difficult to be able to grasp something such as an ikigai, which is something very profound, using this limiting framework with 4 variables. So I'm hoping that resonated with you all in terms of understanding some of the history of how this came to be. You know, I do think that there is benefits to using any framework. But I think if you don't understand the context, and it could actually do you some harm. And so now that I've hopefully gave some insight into the origin story and debunked this, I wanted to next talk about what is the definition. And so I will just go through here of what the authentic definition of ikigai is. And what's beautiful about this concept is that the clues are hidden within the word itself. And Mark, you may be able to see this, who I know speaks Japanese, for those of you who don't know. He did spend some time in Tokyo. He just shared with me before. But Japanese is basically, this word ikigai is 2 components. It's combined with 2 phrases. And you could see here that ikigai is actually 2 components. There's iki and gai. And iki, which is the light green here, refers to life. And then gai translates to worth living, which is why when we translate ikigai, it means what makes your life worth living, or it could be your reason for being. This is really how it came to be. And that is the overall definition. But what's really interesting is that there's additional nuances that each concept highlights. And so while I mentioned overall, the first part, life of iki, refers to this overall idea of life, there's 3 additional definitions and nuances that you want to consider. So the first one is to be alive. This means that we're in this life, so it refers to this idea that you're alive. The second is life and birth. And then the third aspect is daily living. So if you look at iki, it's often used in words that translate to your daily aspect. And so if we understand these nuances, what does this mean? So it is teaching us that to live a life worth living is to, 1, accept that in this life we have an end and it's impermanent. So our time here is limited. But 2, it refers to this idea of daily living. And so, Katie, I know you asked at the beginning of what we could do to create moments for ourselves. And it's really going back to this idea of what can you do today? What are these daily practices that you could do that are going to help you be your authentic self? And then the second aspect, ikigai, which again means worth living overall. But there's two additional nuances that these characters teach us. The first is that it means the result and evidence of your actions. I think this is such a great point, because it's teaching us that it is not about just thinking about certain things. It's about the actions that you take. And so this is such a key point that could help us understand how we can live a more meaningful life. You know, it is through the actions that we take every day that help us understand who we are. And then the next nuance is that it's worth the anticipation and hope. And this is really interesting. So if we understand what it means, it's saying that you don't know for certain whether the actions that you take will be worth it. However, you hope that it will be. So what does this mean? You know, there is this notion that we always have to know for certain that something's going to be good for us, or we want to do this. Like, this is 100% who we are. I'm going to do it only when we're certain. And while that could be helpful sometimes, it could also be debilitating when we feel as though we need to know for certain what our purpose is, or for certain what makes us happy, or what brings us joy. So it's this nuance of acceptance that we do not know, which is actually much more freeing if we think about the actual definition. So I'm curious if, you know, how that lands for everyone. You know, does this give some insight into what it means to live a more, you know, mindful, intentional life? And I want us to keep in mind that these are things that the Venn diagram, I think, you know, fails to address. And so, you know, going back to Katie's question, what we can do, you know, what I would love for everyone to explore today is really about how you could take action in your life today in terms of what can help you in terms of your overall well-being.
I don't know if you can see Emily's hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I have many. Oh, sorry, Emily. Hi.
Hi. No, it's no problem at all. I've literally just raised my hand. So, I mean, it might come across as controversial, but this feels very aspirational. And when I look at how my life unfolds on a daily basis with children and a busy professional and social life, I feel sometimes it's very difficult to pause and think about all these things. And because there's so much going on, I tend to be reactive rather than proactive. And ikigai sounds like a wonderful concept, but in my head, it's something I would probably aspire to when my kids are grown and moved out of the nest, and I'm thinking about, you know, slowing down in my professional life rather than focusing on this right now. So I was wondering if you had a comment on this. You know, to me, it's about, I feel sometimes there's a lack of control, which goes in the way of thinking about these things and well-being and aspirational goals.
Yes, that's such a great question. And I can only imagine, you know, I think we have, in this day and age, we have more things to do than, you know, you have to be a mom, a parent, a job, you have to do it with a friend. I feel like the list is never ending, and you probably feel as though, you know, quite overwhelmed in terms of not even being able to create moments for yourself. So I really, really understand that feeling. And so in terms of my recommendation is that if we can understand that the definition of ikigai is not these vast goals or things that perhaps is outward facing, then it actually helps us understand that it's really about our daily practices. So, when we looked at the overall wellness puzzle, here, let me just quickly change that so it's easier. Here, this wellness puzzle, this is really where we want to focus on in terms of how it could empower you today. So I do have a list here in terms of my recommendations on how you could start your longevity journey, because it really does start with understanding yourself. And I really recommend it could be 1 to 5 minutes in your daily today that you could take for yourself. Sometimes I used to do this while I went to the bathroom, and I would just take an extra 30 seconds to do some breathing to connect with myself. And it could be something where I have my daily calligraphy intention. Writing, that takes a minute for me. And so it's really about breaking it down to achievable things that you could do. So honestly, I really think we could start with 1 minute or even 30 seconds, adding on to that bathroom break, just 3 deep breaths that connect to yourself and see how you feel. Because I think, I know for me, I always felt like I shouldn't focus on myself, that's selfish. I feel like I shouldn't be thinking of myself. But the more and more I realize that I'm on my journey is that you really have to focus on your own personal well-being. And it doesn't take, a lot of money or a lot of time. It's about creating these small moments where you can focus on yourself, would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. No, that brings it back down to earth and makes it feels more achievable to start that way. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, because I was going to say, now that we talked about how we can implement this, I think this is a great point to talk about. So like we mentioned, I think everyone is probably so busy and their own personal well-being is the last thing that they could think about. But the fact that you are on this call today, I think means something. It means something that you are looking and prioritizing your own well-being because it matters. And it's really about, again, taking that 1 minute for yourself today. And a few guiding questions that you could perhaps focus on is that, one, think about your core values. If we look at authenticity, this is really about understanding who you are. And, this is a very popular coaching approach, but you want to focus on these core values that drive your everyday decision-making. So, something that you could do is that you could Google, or it's really easy to say core values list and take a look at it. And you want to pick the top 3 to 5 that align with you. And then from there, you could define what this core value means to you, because this is something that's going to be an anchor in terms of understanding yourself. And next, once you've created these understandings of your core values, you could create a vision that is in alignment with it. And, I think while we mentioned that ikigai is really about focusing on the day to day, that doesn't negate the fact that it's important to also think about what life you want to live that aligns with yourself. So what you can do is, after you listed your core values, you could understand, okay, what does my daily routine look like that's going to align with these core values? Because from there, again, it can help you understand how to create a lifestyle that's going to align with that. Next, we talked about body and soul care. So think about how you're taking care of your body. Like I mentioned, there's these 3 aspects: nourishing food, movement, and rest. So you could look at these components of how are you taking care of yourself with nourishment, how are you taking yourself through movement, as well as taking ample rest. Soul care. So this one is, about our connection. So do you feel like you're taking the time to connect with yourself, connect with your community, and connect with nature? And also your limiting beliefs. I really struggled with this personally. I was very much a perfectionist growing up. And so it was really hard for me to let go of this notion of not being perfect. And so it's actually about embracing these parts about yourself, about being imperfect, being impermanent, meaning every day is a new day. Every day you're one day older. This notion of acceptance is really important because it could help us understand how to let go of ourselves. And so my question to you, it would be to, instead of focus on all 5, is take this time right now to think about which of these 5 speak to you the most in terms of which one you think you want to focus on today. And you could share that with us. You don't have to share that with us. I think is really important. Actually, by vocalizing it, by sharing it, it actually helps with for it to happen. So, I see limiting beliefs, Laura, and one. That's really great. Yes, and if anyone wants to share, that's great too. Limiting beliefs. Oh, nice. Jay, defining core values. Joanne, limiting beliefs and creating vision. Soul care. Yes, I am imperfectly imperfect. That's exactly right. Thank you so much for everyone for sharing it. I think that's really powerful. And I know it takes a lot of courage to address things that you are working on. And the fact that you're able to label this will definitely help you. And so thank you so much for everyone sharing. Creating a vision and limiting beliefs.
I think something that Mark and I have both been talking about recently is, obviously we said at the beginning that we both feel extremely exhausted at the moment. We feel like we're definitely coming up to the summer holidays where I think everyone's just feeling like they're running on empty. And for me, it's allowing myself to stop. I go to the gym regularly every morning. I haven't been at all this week, which I'm fine about because my body was exhausted and I just couldn't imagine doing it. But I can't help but feel guilty about it. So it's that I know I need to do it to allow myself to recover. But then there's that niggling thought in the back of your head that's saying, but you're lazy, you need to keep going and push through it. But then I get worried that I'll just run myself into the ground completely.
Yes, the inner critic. Oh, wow, that's such a good point. And I think it's really great that you're able to identify both sides because I think that's part of the transformation process. It's always about awareness first, but then also something that you could do is try to dig deeper into why that voice, is speaking to you in that sense. Meaning, is it coming from a point of, love and care and gratitude, or is it coming from a place of, judgment? Because that will be helpful in understanding.
So Ori, I as we said before the call, I spent a lot of time in Japan, and I'd like to just share a memory of one of my first visits. Every city in the world has its problem with homeless people, and if you go to London, you see them. If you go to New York, if you go to Tokyo, you see them. Anyway, I checked into my hotel on my first visit, and in the morning went out for a walk around the park that was just across the road from my hotel. And I soon became aware of all of these blue tarpaulins in the park, and suddenly became aware that in living in under these tarpaulins were homeless people. But they were doing things. It was the morning. They were doing things. They were up and active. But it was all about sort of understanding and defining their core values. So they were washing. They were cleaning their socks. They were hanging their washing on washing lines. Things completely different to homeless people in other parts of the world. Which, bearing in mind their limited resources, seem to be creating a vision that was aligned to their core values, bearing in mind their limited resources, and that, you know, taking care of the bodies. They, you know, they were clean, they were washing, which must have led on to 4 around their soul care, which must have then gave them the belief that they could actually get out of that situation. I don't know whether that makes sense, but it's a memory that abides with me from my time in Tokyo, of the difference. But whenever I see homeless people in London, or whether I'm traveling, I always relate and think back to how those mostly men in Tokyo were coping and living in a completely different way to people in other parts of the world with the same challenges and problems that they have.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's a very fascinating story. And I guess I'm thinking, what comes to my mind when I think about that is, you know, something that I found a little bit concerning about the Venn diagram was that it was very external labels. You know, for example, it was like what you get paid for, what the world needs, what you are good at. You know, being good at something can sometimes be, you know, subjective. You know, what is art in and of itself? I think everyone has different tastes in creativity, or being able to express yourself. And I was thinking of this because even when the homelessness, perhaps it's not that, you know, I think externally, if you have the label of being a homeless person, you know, then it can seem like a very negative connotation. But I'd be so curious to understand perhaps that it's not necessarily about these external labels, but perhaps it's about being able to be themselves. And perhaps that's not necessarily in terms of financial gain or being able to live a life that other people perceive to be successful. But, you know, I think you could make the argument that if they were in alignment with who they were, you know, maybe they were living a more authentic life.
Yeah, I think, I mean, but it was safe. They were living, it felt safe, it felt clean, it felt secure, it felt, so it wasn't ideal, clearly, but compared with how other homeless people I've seen living around the world were living, it was you know, a role model, if you like, because I think there was this, you know, and there was the respect, you know, the respectful values, but between them, I think, you know, they all clearly had their marked out patches and were living in harmony with each other, which comes back to values and beliefs. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, I did see a question come in about self-sabotage and whether it's the same as limiting beliefs. And I think that's a great question. And I recommend the book by Emma Gannon that talks about sabotage. I really think that was a great book that talks about some of the research-based findings as well as actual things and that you could take in terms of sabotaging yourself. But I think this connection is very true. You know, I often say that life is duality, meaning there's one thing, you also want another thing. And this is probably, Katie was talking about the exercise component where it's like she understands, you probably understand that you need to rest. But at the same time, you're like, oh, but I need to exercise. And it's these two minds that you have to work with. But, you know, I think being able to label what limiting beliefs are, you know, sabotaging you from achieving yourself in terms of your body, your soul, as well as your core values is going to be a really helpful technique. So, you know, I think perfectionism is very much a common one. I see it amongst my clients as well. And I see it within myself. You know, I keep mentioning that I definitely was a perfectionist, but I see it the more I practice these internal monologues about, okay, I understand that I'm sabotaging myself because I can't let go of this notion that that I have to be perfect. It's like a stain that you see get lighter and lighter each time you practice this. And, you know, I think that's also why at Megumi, we talk about it as being a sustainable wellness journey. you know, this whole thing is a practice that you get to do every single day, and that it's about accepting that some days will be bad, some days will be good. It's all part of the journey. I think that's also another component that's freeing.
Super, thank you. Thank you so much. I wondered, sorry, if you wanted to explain a little bit about these workshops that you do, because I know that obviously Shalaka, one of our members, and I think hopefully she's still on this call, because it may be interesting. I think you said you were hosting one in September. I mean, I found this incredibly insightful. So if you want to share it with everyone, maybe you can extend the invitation out to them as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I did mention we do you know, team building as well as wellness events centered around presence, and you know how we talked about how presence and mindfulness are coming from our creative outlets. And so you could see the pictures on the right. This was an event that I did, and it was centered around a community event that's focused on creating moments of presence together. So what we did is we learned about the principles of calligraphy, and then we all walk through the meaning behind it. And then we all had these moments of collective experience to write calligraphy together. And the beauty of it is that through its practice, you'll be able to have that flow state, like people mentioned, or these moments of calm and presence, and for yourself, but also as a community. And, you know, I think that's something that's really important when we think about, you know, teams or communities that we are part of. We saw that our soul seeks connection to ourselves, but also our community. And, you know, what we do in these workshops is really combine these two. And yeah, I know it looks like Shalaka has to drop off, but I think Katie mentioned that in terms of the workshop. So yeah, so we are hosting this in September, and this is in partnership with Craft Central, which is a nonprofit art organization that's near Canary Wharf. And what we do is Shalaka does Jesmonite homeware, and Jesmonite is a more sustainable type of cement. But she hosts these workshops where you could have these coasters, and then you could create your own coasters. And in that time, we're also going to be talking about how your sustainable journey connects from both homeware, but also your lifestyle. So we're going to do a collaboration there. And so we're just penning out the details now, but we'll send them along to Katie for if anyone wants to join. Yeah.
Super, thank you so much. And maybe we should consider a joint kind of in-person workshop as well. I think that, well, there was, you know, 25, 26 people on the call today. So clearly there's an appetite for it. So maybe we should look at doing something a bit later in the year together.
Absolutely.
Super. Well, thank you so much. Does anyone have any other kind of final comments that they'd like to make? No, everyone's all happy. Super. Okay. Mark, are you running a Men for Inclusion session on Friday, or?
Yeah, we've got it's just a pop-in session on Friday. So if anybody wants to join us on Friday, it's on the Men for Inclusion part of the website. I think the call starts at 12. I'm Katie. I'm only going to be on it for the first 15 minutes. So it's a really open discussion. Come along and join us. I think that's it, Katie.
I think that's it.
For the summer. We can go on our summer holidays proud and say, Ori, thank you for that enlightening session, the last one before the summer break. Absolutely amazing. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Thank you all for all your support over the last year. And we will get together again in September, and hopefully some more social events coming up where we can meet you all as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you.